Hello, Michael Hopkins at Seeking Alpha with Jennifer Warren, Concept Elemental. Following up, in fact, do we speak earlier in the month? Was it the eclipse?
It was the eclipse. Yeah.
Years
Yeah.
ago? I remember it seems like a lot has changed, or a lot has changed, but a lot has been on your plate since then. So I feel like it's been some time, but it's
Yeah.
good to follow up with you. So let's just get into it. You recently presented at the University of Montana, the World Affairs Council. Um, just tell us what you were doing there and any key takeaways at that event.
Sure. So that was April 16th. Yeah, a week after our eclipse
After.
discussion.
Yeah.
And yeah, it feels like it's been 6 months since we last
Right.
talked, but truly. Now, Montana was amazing and cool. And it's University of Montana is in Missoula, and it's just pristine, and it's a college town, and it's really, really neat. But they bring, yeah.
And it snowed on you
It
when you were there.
snowed. Yeah, the morning after the conference. Yeah, it was totally snowing. It was like 60 when I landed 2 days prior. And then it was snowing the morning I left. So I didn't get to kind of cruise around the little town and, because I was in Dallas clothes. So anyway, no, but it was really interesting because it was, again, Middle East experts. And 3 days before the conference was when Iran attacked Israel. For the first time, Iran came out of behind its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, etc. And so there was this tension, right, at that point, not knowing what was going to happen. It was like all hell gonna break loose in the Middle East further. That was one. And so there was that sort of analysis going on. So it was very heavy in that respect. And and there was also some analysis and discussions about Chechnya and Egypt and Afghanistan, all that area that abuts Russia. And so that was pretty intense. And boy, what an interesting part of the world. Very, very different. And also the consul general of India was there, and he spoke that evening, and it was really amazing to hear the India story. Really amazing things. They held the G20 last year, the presidency of the G20, and they're really being looked to for lots of reasons. They're the largest democracy, and we're the oldest democracy, and so they just installed a new consulate in Seattle, and so that was also kind of notable. And there's stuff on my website about that. But and I presented about energy, but I also presented some about not just energy demand, energy fundamentals, but also some of the transition dynamics. All my field work, boots on the ground, going to conferences, going to the Fed, all traipsing across the country, learning what's going on. And then also I talked about this development in the Texas Triangle that is sort of an example of reindustrialization and sustainable development and circular economy and all these really interesting, innovative ideas. And so that was I sort of segged my energy work with sort of, marrying it with some real world examples as well. Because there's a big Samsung chip plant, that we talked about last time that's being cited in that area. And, so there's all these implications, for, growth, investment, and all that. But
It a lot to cover. Was it 2 or 3 days? I think it was
it
two.
was one.
One
They
day.
smashed it into one day, but
Uh,
I think they're going to do a reboot in October. So,
yeah.
yeah. And then,
So I don't know if you got something to present
oh,
from that.
EarthX, sorry.
Oh, like slides or anything from that event.
Well, they're on some of it's on my website, and I'll talk about it some of the summit. But the other thing that you were going to ask about EarthX,
Yes.
yeah, because that was really so there I was in a security, like geopolitical and security issues that week, and then EarthX was just last week, and it's a huge conference of conferences. It's the biggest sustainable development and all things sustainability in the world, and it's here in Dallas. And so I attended a number of panels, and one, I'll sort of have to go in order because it's the only way I can remember. I started with some circular economy panels listening in, and what was really an interesting development is advanced plastics and advanced plastic recycling. And there was somebody on the panel from Dow. She was a scientist, and she was like their chief sustainability officer. And Dow is really progressive. I was really amazed, and I thought they had a really great story. And really what they call, what they're in is, the materials ecosystem. And so that was kind of interesting. I also listened to something on, nature-based biomimicry, because I'm interested in that, but that's not exactly investable. So one thing I can say about the idea of circular economy is just that it's really a long-term phenomenon. It's not just like, we're just going to recycle this and that's it. It's a whole integrated approach, really. And that's what that development I wrote about really reflected, was this circular economy idea. The other thing was nuclear. In the IRA legislation, there are incentives for more nuclear development. And actually, an executive from Constellation, which is a utility that has a great proportion of the nuclear fleet in their asset portfolio, they spoke. So there's definitely policy support for nuclear, and that's absolutely needed for this low carbon transition because it's base load. And as we've discussed, you've got to have the base load to smooth out the intermittency with wind and solar. And also it's a lot of bang for the buck, and a lot of the big tech firms, need that type of base load that's clean. They want clean base load. Obviously, there's uranium issues. We're still in the United States trying to work out what designs we're going to, go with. And there's some global competition related to all that. And that's sort of like a lot of deep detail I shouldn't even talk about right now. I'm not qualified for that. But I know enough to understand what they were talking about. And it's going to take time. And one thing the Constellation exec said was just that, our current fleet is really underappreciated, and the life of a lot of the nuclear assets are going to probably get extended. So that's kind of an interesting energy thought.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was it. It's just a huge, and I attended the Island Resilience Summit, which brought a lot of dignitaries from Oceania and the Caribbean. And really interesting because they're really on the front lines of climate change, sea level rise, disaster, natural disasters, and very much witnessing the effects of biodiversity loss, like coral reef bleaching, all of it. So they came and told their story. So there's really different opportunities, in areas that are going to emerge over time, even to do with oceans, but that hasn't really made it exactly into the stock market yet. But it's a development.
So this Island Resilience Summit, that was a track that was part of EarthX.
Yeah, there was like circular economy track, an energy track, a politics track, a island resilience track. There was probably eCapital Summit, family offices. There's probably like 10 tracks, so you have to literally pick over 5 to 6 days. And I toggled between some of the tracks just to target, my energy or related sustainability investment ideas, so see what was going on, what's in development, and also regarding publicly listed firms, what are they doing, so.
It's a lot. I mean, you two very different conferences, different perspectives. I think for
Yeah.
someone who went to, the World Affairs Council one week and then to EarthX the next week, their head would be spinning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's with energy, the security part is, geopolitics, right? And energy and development. And then the other is all the sustainability related things to do with, energy transition ideas. So to me, they all play together, but it's a lot to keep up with, from kind of a macro level, and then try to bring it down to some, what are some micro level theses, but
Well, that'd be a good, was there one unifying message or theme from that you could take from both attending both of those conferences?
be very careful. Be very careful about your choices, and really look at the fundamentals. That's my memo. It just keeps being my memo. Look at the fundamentals. What is affordable, what is needed, where are things at, what's investable, and what's a longer term vision and play, and who has it, especially of these like super majors, where are they playing, what spaces. But so should we look at these few slides? I just
Yeah, let's
pulled up some
jump.
slides that are kind of reflective of some of the things I was talking about, just to kind of look at how the market's looking at some of these things a little bit. So let me try to screen share here. Here we go.
We go with the Texas
So this
triangle.
is my obligatory map slide for you, Michael, knowing that you always like a map.
Right.
So this is actually one that I had at the University of Montana, just showing this Texas triangle area that I've talked about. In fact, this is population density right here. So you can see this is Dallas-Fort Worth to the north, San Antonio, Austin's right over here, kind of up this way, and then Houston. And there's actually geological reasons this is the way it is, believe it or not. And it goes back to like, centuries prior. So we won't go into that, but that's just all my resources thing. But this is just kind of looking at, some of the ideas presented. So XLE, energy, AMSA, energy infrastructure midstream, XLI, industrials. AMSA's done quite well. This is 1 year. And then I threw in there CEG, which is Constellation, the utility I said that has a lot of the nuclear in their fleet. Well, look at this. Look at this breakout. This happened, so that 150% in the last year. And I think, there's different reasons for that, but I just wanted to show that since I just been with them. And then this one, the purple SBG, it's Schneider, the big European utility that's really been on the vanguard of all things sustainable and low carbon. So, and I think they have a decent dividend as well. And so, I mean, I would actually call them kind of a energy transition bellwether. And I know an RIA that's had that stock for many years and it's done well in the portfolio, just FYI. And then I have SMH, my semiconductors with NVIDIA and everybody in that I always like to look at and compare them to, the other options, the other sectors. But, energy chugging along has been. And then this is just looking at year to date. And here we have Fang, which is Diamondback, big Permian player that's been in the middle of one of those big mergers, doing well. It's a stock I have. LNG, not so much. XLE, reasonable. Dow, I just put Dow in there, the orange, just to kind of see what was the situation. But I believe they have a decent dividend as well. So that's just in the last year to date. And then SMH, the semiconductors, like 25%. This is just adding in COP, ConocoPhillips here, with XLE, AMSA. This is year to date. So basically just saying oil and gas infrastructure, oil and gas has been solid. This blue and that you can hardly see is Williams, and that's more, they're a little bit more natural gas weighted. And that's something I will talk about in the future when, at the summit, that kind of some of that. Okay, so here's a little bit of some transition play. Okay, so there was an announcement that, BHP, the huge mining company, would be trying to acquire Anglo American. And I received this press release like right when it was happening and the night before it was happening and all that. And this is kind of just showing, what that deal would look like, that it would be creating this mining superpower, and this is, again, that setup to the energy transition, the metals, minerals, and mining equation that has to happen for EVs and solar panels and, transmission lines and all the tech, and so that's kind of, and as you can see, there's a big copper component, and then nickel's important in energy transition things as well. Again, this slide's from Wood Mackenzie. And then, they were just talking about copper, that, they're expecting copper to go up because of the demand, that there's, anticipated so much demand because of, all the things I just mentioned to do with the energy transition. And this is just kind of showing the state of mines, and, there's a lot of expansion, and, we see this big dip, right? Actually, this dip also kind of coincided with some of the shale dip, funny enough. Right here we have the peak, and then the financial crisis just kind of like, laid bare to different things. And then then it starts coming up during the pandemic, because there's all this enthusiasm for low carbon, themed investment. Okay, and then this is just kind of showing I just wanted to throw the Magnificent Seven in there, because what was really striking to me, if you look at the way this chart looks, oh, and then by the way, they were just saying out of all of the firms, only Alphabet has, stayed up, relative to the others. But what is interesting to me, what this reminded me of, was I thought that it looks like oil and gas stocks, all the volatility. And somebody discussed this in Bloomberg about, this volatility that, they're starting to see in these stocks, which is kind of interesting. But to me, it kind of looked like what I'm used to seeing with oil stocks, right? I haven't connected those dots yet, but I just noticed it. And this is, again, just kind of looking at some of the mining stocks. And here's BHP. And this is year to date down, because, anybody that's the acquirer, their stock always gets hit. And then the, to be acquired, gets a bump, which is here. This is Anglo American right here, the red up, with the announcement. This green stock is Grupo Mexico. And the reason that they have been doing kind of well is because they have copper mining. Again, the copper theme, right? Copper, energy transition. And then one other look is rare earths. And this is EarthX is the parent company, and I believe they're traded in Australia on their stock market. But these are the ones that are traded here, the ASX equivalents. And as you can see, this is year to date. Different shifts in momentum. With rare earths, because there was this find in Wyoming, basically. But that's also, again, connected to energy transition, because we have this mining issue. We talked about this, I don't even know if it was like a year and a half ago, with that minerals mining and everything video that we did, discussing the transition. And so, while we are seeing some variation on these themes, like how is it evolving, right? And that's kind of what I'm looking at, compared to, instead of having the debates about EVs versus hybrids, which we know, there are increasingly more hybrids being bought. And we know there's kind of, squishiness with EVs and, there's just all these issues. But this is just some of the underbrush to me of all of it, because you've got to have the mining and the metals and the minerals, to make it happen, to make a lot of that happen. And so there's a renewal in some of that. And then this is just finally, this is India ETFs. This one, the fuchsia is the Franklin India ETF, and I just put that there. This is year to date. It's been doing well. And, as I said, I think this is capturing some of the momentum of, India being on the world stage at the G20, people learning more about it, interest, momentum, and then some positive fundamentals. So I think that is the end. Yep. I'll
All
stop
right.
sharing.
Great slides. And you know what? I don't think we talk as much about miners and mining and what the role is with energy transition than we have done with other conversations that we've had in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that when investors, obviously these are on investor radars, but I think they think about EVs, they think about solar panels. Maybe there's a bigger picture item that investors might be missing in terms of miners and the bigger, the bigger role with the energy transition.
No, definitely. And the reason I look at them, it's because of my resources lens that I look at all of it, because of chronicling all the shale booms, right? And that's actually something I presented about in Montana, and I helped explain my approach because I've chronicled all these shale booms for 2 decades, and I have like a resources economics point of view. That's why I'm looking at miners like that. And there's different dynamics to do with mining that I am not savvy about, but there are fundamentals to do with geopolitics. And so that's why I'm kind of like, aside from the fact that, there's all this thought that, we're just going to transition. Well, it is going to take a while. It's going to take, decades, on all this. And in the meantime, hence the interest in nuclear and updating existing fleets, extending the life of these assets if you want low carbon energy, and so that gets really interesting. And I'll talk about some of these ideas. I'm piecing it together in my talk at your summit in June. But no, you're right. And this is the first time I've kind of gotten more in the weeds, because it actually takes some time to figure out where's the puck going, And so, there's a lot of pucks out there. Which one are you going to follow, And so I've picked one where I can have a line of sight for myself that I can wrap my own head around and kind of get some thoughts on why things are moving and what's value and what will be valuable, right?
Absolutely. And it's like you said, it's not just one puck, it's many pucks that, the people have to watch.
Yeah.
Um, this week is the Fed, and there's a lot of attention being put on the Fed and what they're going to do, and probably in the situation will be higher for longer. And a lot of it's tied to the inflation narrative. And I think that when you talk about inflation, you talk about energy. So any thoughts about that? I mean, not so much about maybe what the Fed will do. I think people
Yeah.
kind of see where the Fed is going to go, but how does energy play within the inflation narrative, and what do investors need to know long term?
Yeah. No, I mean, I noticed that, oil went down, of course, just because the expectation that it will shave demand, that it will temper this demand some. And that's the central theme, right? And but we still have to see how it plays out, I mean, it sort of is what it is, right? It's a bit baked in some respects, but there's also the thought like, okay, what's going to happen with the consumer driven economy, and just, and then what's happening with the rest of the world as well, with, because there's a lot of energy growth demand in the rest of the world, which I don't think is going to change. I think that's, pretty solid as long as we don't mess it up, like, with our economy. I think everything looks good for everybody, right? But we're not the only game in town, and I know that there's some, like, the Europe equation, and one thing I wanted to say about the Montana summit is just that Russia is really been a drain on Europe, and that is probably, that's worse than our inflation situation, in a total point of view, total impact point of view. But reshaping things to some extent. But no, I mean, I'm not worried about it. I think it's more the same in some respects, but I think it's just also, I think there's a signal of, don't get crazy with, stock ideas and, just throwing money into momentum and this, have a little discernment, right? And so I think that's the memo for me, is just kind of, is it as excited as I want to get about the Magnificent Seven and all that and semiconductors, and I want to get excited about it, and I am, but I also have to kind of like tone it, just kind of, put a cooler hat on, and I think that's it. I think it's just, cooler heads prevailing kind of thing. And that's actually good, because we know with this IRA legislation, low carbon is inflationary, it's cost, and so, that could actually temper a little bit of that development as well, so.
It's always interesting. Some of our conversations always end up on the geopolitical stuff that's going on. Do
Because it's
you
always the
feel
wrench, right? I mean, it's always the wrench. Look at the financial crisis. Look at the pandemic and how it shakes out everything. Like after the financial crisis, we were in this high globalization mode right before the financial crisis. And I talked about that in Montana. We have the financial crisis that, tamps down everything for years, and then everything's coming back. Then the pandemic, and then Russia, and then the Middle East, and and the Middle East actually, I think there's a little more sanity happening there, frankly, than Russia. you know, um, that's really interesting. But just on the impact and the understanding that, we don't want an all-out war here in the Middle East, right? I mean, it's just not in anybody's interest. And so I think, I feel like that's kind of like where things are at there on the geopolitical front. Not that there's not going to be things, raising their ugly head, but anyway.
it's a lot to think about. I think that people get stuck on one narrative and then they forget about the other narrative that they need to think about as well too.
Yeah, yeah. Geopolitics, inflation, and what those wrought, because they do a lot, and then black swans, right? Like a pandemic, and what that has done in terms of onshoring, changing that calculus. Like look at the semiconductor industry, so.
So as we enter May and then we get into June with our Seeking Alpha Investor Summit in New York, which we'll be attending, and we're appreciative of that. What's on your radar for the month? What do you think that you'll be looking at, and what do you think investors need to be looking at?
Well, I just think watching the effect of, the interest rate response, how it impacts behavior, firm behavior, consumer behavior, if there's much change, because we also have like the summer coming up, driving season, all this, how will it impact that? Just kind of keeping that tamp down on the brakes a little bit, maybe that's not a bad thing, in the long run, right? I mean, and the Fed has to consider the long run, you know. So, you know,
It'll be very interesting, not only the geopolitical stuff, the inflation, how consumers respond to
mhm.
all of that all too. And if they, and I think that one particular item is what they do this summer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And hopefully no hopefully no more geopolitical surprises. Hopefully, you know, I don't
Right.
want to have to talk about that in June. So,
Well, that's all I got. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
no, just looking forward to getting to be face to face with everybody in June in New York City. That'll be really great. The whole Seeking Alpha crew and other people speaking and on panels and things. So big lineup, big, you know, it's going to be exciting. Um,
Well, we're looking forward to having you there and looking forward to any other updates you got.
yeah, that's all I got.
Great. Thanks again for the time. Appreciate it. And I will say I do like a good map, so thanks for including the Texas Triangle.
I always have a good map I can share. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for the time.